I greet you all. I greet you all in this important project we're going to undertake together. I must start by making some confessions, man. You know, I worked on this project and I started reading crazy, going back and just, you know, getting lost in the material that has been prepared. I would really love people, if they are on, not to interrupt with just mute whatever is there. I mean, really, we should just get everyone out of the thing. I don't want this sort of thing, because anyway, I'm a little bit frustrated because the material that I'm dealing with is so much, and it is all over, and I am not satisfied with my own, you know, attempt to bring this together, despite the fact that I have this kind of almost visceral, if you like, need to enter this conversation. Firstly, I just want to remind everyone that the topic of tonight is, did Mandela sell out? The Madiba versus the Hani and Winnie options. And I want to dedicate this talk to the Rivonia trialists. We know that the last one of them has just left us. And I start my talk with presenting two quotations which are going to guide my arguments as I navigate this talk. First, I start with a quotation by Adam et al. They put together a book, 1997, Comrades in Business, and there's a quotation I'll return to again, and it says, he, Nelson Mandela, never wavered for a moment in what he wanted. He wanted a simple majority rule democracy. For that, and please underline that, for that, he could compromise on economic policy, civil service, and transitional arrangement. Now, people who follow South African politics will know when we talk about compromise on economic policy, it means that the economy remains in the white hands. Compromise on civil society means that there's the sunset clauses. They will maintain the apartheid guys for a little while in, and those transitional arrangements. And then there's a Lenin quote, and I'll just take just the first few lines there, and because I'm going to come back to that quotation. And Lenin says, here's the important thing about this particular quotation. It's September 1917. People who follow the Russian Revolution would know, for instance, that October, that revolution happens. But in September, look there, a few weeks before the revolution, we see Lenin saying, the task of a truly revolutionary party is not to declare that it is impossible to renounce all compromises, but to be able, through all compromises, when they are unavoidable, to remain true to its principles, to its class, and to its revolutionary purpose. I'll leave it at that. Those are the phrases in recent times. It is, in fact, has become the shorthand for all the failures of the ANC government in the last 26 years. Increasingly, among the young militants, or the new woke, as I like to call them, Mandela is certainly a figure of derision, seen as a traitor to the cause of Black liberation, right? In fact, to be woke today, one ought to display some kind of animosity, if not indifference, to the figure of Nelson Mandela. So I'm saying this is the new fad that is going on, and I'll explain this new fad is not innocent at all, and I think that is part of my motivation to make this talk. You'll see it is deeply implicated in the geopolitical reality of our time. Now, here is an important, I would say, caveat. In this intervention, I would evaluate the efficacy of the claim that Mandela sold out from the point of view of not his critiques, myself included, but rather on his own political objectives. So I'm saying, let us assess Nelson Mandela on what he was prepared to die for, and what he understood his project was, not from what we as critics, and I'll go through those because I believe those criticisms, historical and contemporary, are very important for two reasons, and I'll explain that. But I include myself in those who present a critique which, for the purpose of this particular intervention, has no utility, if you like. To develop this analysis, which I'm going to present, we shall revisit the historical criticism of Mandela's political praxis and try to present what Mandela's own conception of liberation is. Then evaluate how far has he gone to realizing his own project of liberation within the complications, of course, of what is possible. The critiques of Mandela are presented for two main reasons. First, because they have no bearing at all in the evaluation I'm making of Mandela's compromises. However, I rehash them in anticipation of the possible rebuttals that will be informed by this existing criticism. In other words, I'm going to tell you the three main important criticisms of Nelson Mandela's work historically. What are they? And I will summarize them. I do that because I want to cover myself. I don't want anybody coming and saying to me, oh, but you know, in 1955, so Buko said this, or 1943, you know, the unionist movement. I'm going to present those arguments, right? And then pack them. But that is the one reason that, I mean, these are important. I'm saying that this intervention is important those because they are of historical value. And I want to cover myself. Well, I'm simply saying I'm aware of those criticisms. Secondly, the second reason why I'm presenting those critiques is because of pedagogic value. They have pedagogic value. I hope that some people, some young people in particular, who are part of the liberation movement trying to think through these questions, if they were not, they will be aware that these criticisms have been presented. And it is their duty to go and, I suppose, study them further. Then let me justify why this intervention. I mean, and I have had a very difficult afternoon, you know, from my comrades and other people say, but why this? Why are you rescuing Mandela? Let me be clear, and I'll repeat this. This project is not about rescuing Mandela. I have not changed my attitude in as far as the criticism of Nelson Mandela's project is concerned, as particularly held by the Black Consciousness movement, which we'll come to. I will start with the New Unity movement. I will talk about the white left. I will go to the PAC, and then I'll finish with the Black Consciousness movement's critique of Nelson Mandela. So why this intervention? Why this lecture, if you like? Why this talk? Firstly, because there has been a very misleading reading of Nelson Mandela in the failure of the democratic experimentation, if you like. The real culprits who betrayed the vision of Nelson Mandela have been able to hide in the forest. Project, the heart of my project, is to show that Mandela didn't really sell out his ideals. On the contrary, he was sold out by the ANC leadership that took over after him. So this is the real. Where we were is simply at sketching out my project, right? Saying that, you know, I'm doing this for two main reasons, you know, to explain firstly that Mandela did not sell out his vision, instead he was sold out. And I'm saying that the second reason is to introduce or to invite young revolutionaries to the appreciation of the tactic of battle, and to see how we can avoid committing the same mistakes of lost opportunities where state power in particular is concerned. I will talk a lot about state power, because I'm going to argue that Mandela's project was very limited to attainment of state power. As it will become clearer later in the talk, the Mandela compromises opened the possibility for continuing the revolutionary process to end white supremacies. And I'm arguing even beyond the limited vision of social democracy organized around the Freedom Charter that Nelson Mandela himself held. Okay, so I'm saying the compromises he cut open such a big possibility, which in fact, whoever took power after Mandela should be able to have deepened the revolutionary process even beyond the limited project that we criticize Nelson Mandela for. I will try to explain how the contemporary upsurge, now this is my other point, of the Mandela as a sellout is part of an imperialist project. The Mandela as a sellout mantra this mantra now has political utility for imperialism. And this was a consequence of the ideological split in the ruling party that played itself out as the pro white monopoly capital faction led by Ramaphosa versus the radical economic transformation faction led by Jacob Zuma. And I'll give some details on that. I'm saying the contemporary critique of Nelson Mandela, these new people, young people, Mandela is a sellout, all these, to magnify and legitimize their claim, argue that, well, if you juxtapose Mandela against Winnie, you will see why he's a sellout. So Winnie and Hani represent the other side of the coin. Now, the person that presented that argument best is Julius Malema at Oxford, and I'll come back again and again to this one. In Oxford in December, I think it's actually November or October in 2015 when he was in Oxford, and he explained the Nelson Mandela presented as a sellout, all right? And I'm going to jump all that and Paul, don't worry about a lot about that quotation because I'm gonna come back to it. And explain later on that in fact, there was Winnie Mandela who was ready to fight on. Now, Mandela is a compromiser. Winnie Mandela is and Hani are represented as the romantic magnificence, or they represent the romantic magnificent fantasy of revolutionary masses marching to the union buildings atop captured South African Defence Force military tanks clad in tattered military fatigues, brandishing the AK-47 Castro chair-like. This option are presented as two routes, the Nelson Mandela compromise route and this insurrectionary route of Winnie and Hani. They are presented as two equally available realities, but Mandela chose negotiation instead of insurrection. I'm going to challenge that proposition. Okay, the framework, what framework I'm using here? It's complicated, you'll see in the notes themselves. I'm going back to a little bit of dialectical process. I'm not going to bore you with that, okay? But people who are serious, or seriously want to understand how I'm thinking about this will see the notes themselves. But I'm going to actually to Lenin, and when he's arguing, and Althusser argues against Lenin, and Althusser says, well, insists that Lenin's judgment that nobody had understood capital, that's capital, because they failed to grasp Hegel's logic, that need to be inverted. In other words, Lenin's argument that you can't understand capital if you don't understand Hegel, Althusser says you have to invert that, turn that around. It's only through, in fact, reading Marx that Hegel is made possible. Now, although Marx could not have produced capital had he not studied Hegel, it is Hegel that cannot be understood without studying Marx. Similarly here, simply don't worry about that complication. Where I'm going is here. A similar reading can be made of Mandela. All criticisms of the reactionary tendency of the ANC and the negotiation settlement are the cornerstone of the Black radical thought, we know that. However, a backward reading of Mandela shows us that Mandela is made possible, or rather this backward reading is made possible through the various concessions he made at CODESA. It is argued that whilst Mandela might have closed off a more immediate radical outcome of South Africa, I propose that his moves be read as having opened up perhaps even more radical possibilities. Where I'm going with that is here. Whilst it's popular to argue that Mandela failed Black people in South Africa, I contend that it might be more regenerative to consider whether it was in fact Mbeki, perhaps unsurprisingly, who failed Madiba. Where I'm going really is this. You will not understand Mandela's possibilities if you don't understand Thabo Mbeki. Just like, you'll not understand, Hegel if you don't understand what Marx is saying. Here I'm simply saying, to understand Mandela and put him in his proper context, you have to understand Mbeki. And this is the missing analysis in the attempt to understand Mandela. Right, let us deal with the critiques quickly. What are these critiques that I promise that I present historically of Mandela's project? First is the Marxist critique of the New Unity Movement. I.B. Tabata, a lot of people who follow this stuff will know. I.B. Tabata in 1948 writes a letter to Nelson Mandela. Nelson Mandela is a young guy. He's just come into the Youth League, but is vibrant. I.B. Tabata, outside of the ANC, criticizing the ANC all the time for being an accommodationist organization and so on, rise to Mandela, I.B. Tabata, rise to Mandela. And in that letter, he raises a lot of questions. I will not go into those questions. But he warns Mandela about the contradictory position they find themselves as youth leaders. He says the youth league is progressive, the ANC, your mother body, is reactionary. And your association with the ANC means that, in fact, you yourself are going to be compromised. And the reason you are in the ANC only can be because you are opportunists, right? What were the criticisms of the ANC? The ANC was collaborating with the enemy. The ANC was participating in things like Mabunga, things like supporting white guys in parliament representing Black people outside. It was a mess. And I.B. Tabata says to Mandela in this letter, do not go there. Do not look at your contradictions. And in fact, you should not be in the ANC unless you're a populist who seeks, personal glory. But I think what I want to carry here is simply that this letter is now being used to say it was a warning that Mandela should know that the ANC is a sellout organization, but Mandela did not listen to that. Therefore, Mandela is a sellout already in 1948. Then there's a white criticism, which I call white left criticism. They say the ANC sold out in 1912. That argument somehow mirrors our argument, right? And here in the notes, I go through these white guys. It's a raft of them writing very hectic stuff. But the big question is, the ANC was formed by chiefs and the petty bourgeoisie. And by virtue of this class reality of the ANC leadership, selling out is predetermined. And I raise this question that it is surprising that they would raise this as this white leftist Marxists who themselves are sons and daughters of land thieves, do not see any irony in saying by virtue of one's education or class as an African, you are going to sell out because you're going to reproduce your class interests at the expense of the liberation movement. That I called racist, because we know from a Marxist point of view, there's a whole argument developed that the middle class can assume a revolutionary consciousness and become a subject of the proletarian revolution, but they don't give us as Black people this possibility. But that argument is there also. I want to put it to bed. Then let's deal quickly with the criticism of Mandela by the Pan-Africanist Congress. We all know that comes to the Freedom Charter. I will not go through the letter. There's a controversial letter of 1970 of Del Gerhardt, right? Del Gerhardt supposedly interviews Sobukwe, and Sobukwe reflects on Nelson Mandela. And he says some very interesting things, part of which are, according to his discredited interview, because people say, well, Del Gerhardt, when asked recently whether she took any notes or recording of this conversation with Sobukwe, she said no, she reproduced this conversation completely from memory. That is a serious question. But anyway, Del Gerhardt's construction of that conversation, amongst others, says that when Sobukwe's reflection on Mandela was that he's a very arrogant man. He lacks common touch. And then Sobukwe says, I remember him at one meeting around the time of Defiance campaign. People had gone in there, still undecided if they were going to participate. Mandela got up and said very promptly, all those with us, come forward. All those others, get out. And most people got out, he says, Sobukwe said, and they were put off by his manner. And then he also talks about how Mandela would, but the point there again is simply to say, he's trying to present the argument that Mandela's personal conduct is not one of revolutionary. But as far as the Freedom Charter is concerned, here is a central criticism, of course, we know, and Sobukwe says about the Freedom Charter, a document that guides Mandela. The Freedom Charter is a colossal fraud, ever perpetrated upon the oppressed, exploited, and degraded people. It clearly bears the stamps of its origin. It is a product of the slave colonial mentality and colonialist orientation. Okay, let's put that to bed. Let's finish off that criticism with the criticism presented by the Black Consciousness Movement. And then I will say we've covered all the criticism of at least the most representative criticisms of Nelson Mandela's politics. Now, Black Consciousness Movement, let's take it in 1994 elections and its attitude towards, unlike the PAC, which participated in the negotiations and also in the elections while presenting a critique, the Black Consciousness Movement did not participate in the negotiations at all. They argued those negotiations were compromised. They argued it was a sellout argument, deal. Not only that, AZAPO, which represented the Black Consciousness at the time, the Azanian People's Organization, simply boycotted the elections of 1994. I think it's very important that they said, we're not going to give legitimacy to this sellout project of Nelson Mandela. Okay? So please don't come back to me and say, oh, you know, you are presenting Nelson Mandela as a savior. I'm saying to you, I know the criticisms. And in fact, I align myself with the criticism particularly presented by the Black Consciousness Movement, that the whole ANC project of the negotiations, if you look at it, in fact, was a sellout project. So that's not where I am. Where I am is, but what was Mandela's project? And whether did he actually betray his mission? Before I go to that, let's deal with quickly the new call for Mandela is a sellout. I'm arguing that, and this is, I think, a very important and interesting, project that people must undertake who are interested in this, is that actually, while the historical criticism of Nelson Mandela's politics and revolutionary conduct are about politics held by his contemporaries, a large part of contemporary Mandela is a sellout mantra, contemporary, current, is an outcome of the British imperialism led by Robert Renwick. This is, I think, for me, a very surprising turn of events. It's also ironic because we know that Robert Renwick is the representative of the Queen in the UK. We know that Robert Renwick is a known fan of Nelson Mandela. However, recent political developments in South Africa has caused that Robert Renwick, in fact, goes against Nelson Mandela. You see, when that battle happened between the ANC, RET forces and the Tumamina or the Stellenbosch project, this possibility towards the ANC elective conference frightened imperialism because they really believed that there was a possibility that the radical economic transformation forces could take over. And if they did take over, they might do these things that they were promising of nationalization and so on. And therefore, the interests of imperialism will be in trouble. So they responded in two ways. Firstly, they responded by basically giving money to, of course, the Ramaphosa to buy the ANC conference, but they were still worried about what if these guys still win? What if the RET forces win? What would happen then? There was plan B. That plan B, we keep on referring to it as Project 2019. Now you'll ask the question, but where does Mandela come in here? Well, here is it. Project 19 meant that the losing faction, if it was the Ramaphosa faction, they would have left the ANC and they would form the party. And together with the EFF and the DA, they would have formed a government. They have already tested that in the 2016 local government elections. So that's Project 2019, right? In fact, I know that there's a clip. I don't know if Mpo has it, where Julius Malema confirms this, that he was working with Derek Hanekom to get rid of Jacob Zuma, and in that working with Derek Hanekom, there was an agreement that, in fact, or Derek Hanekom made them understand that should they lose the conference, the Nazareth conference, they will form a political party, which they will obviously then work with the EFF and the DA to form a government. That is plan B of the project 2019. The first is by the ANC conference. If you fail, if you lose there, you'll have to leave the ANC and form a political party as Ramaphosa and your faction, and whatever you get, you can then form a government. Here's the thing. Nelson Mandela is the problem for that project, because if you leave the ANC, you live with Nelson Mandela with his big stature. In other words, the other ET people will simply say, oh, well, they've left Nelson Mandela's party, they'll use Nelson Mandela's stature, and then in this way, they'll be able to mitigate against getting less than 50% by using the image of Nelson Mandela. So Robin Renwick then makes a move. He says, well, let's cut Mandela to size. In the event we lose the conference and we have a new party which must contest, and Mandela's image will become a problem, what do? You go and you attack Nelson Mandela's image, right? To make sure that the ANC of Zuma, if you like, doesn't get 51%. And here, this is the thing. Then in London, when Julius Malema was there, he attacks Nelson Mandela for the first time. And I mean, if you look at the timeline is very, very interesting, because in 2013, when Nelson died, these guys went there to pay their respects. Not only that, we know that in 2011, a young guy had written a piece. This guy calls himself, it's a very popular piece. He's calling himself Youngster, and this guy wrote a piece that if you can Youngster, if you look at Youngster, Nelson Mandela is a sellout, you'll find it a very popular piece. It went really viral. And in 2012, the deputy president of the EFF, Floyd Shivambu, in fact writes a response to that piece. He writes a response to that piece, and he says, and I quote him here, President Nelson Mandela is one of the most renowned defenders of the Freedom Charter, who, even when it was not fashionable to do so, stood firm in defense of the Freedom Charter. Now, I did not go into what Julius said in London, but he simply said Nelson Mandela is a sellout because he sold out the Freedom Charter. This is 2015. By 2011, 2012, Floyd was saying Mandela is the biggest defender of the Freedom Charter, right? We know that there was a secret meeting with Robin Renwick, and thereafter the tune then changed. So where I'm going with that, I'm saying the new upsurge, Mandela is a sellout, time-wise can be pegged in 2015 in London. And why that happened is because white monopoly capital and imperialism needed to bring down the stature of Nelson Mandela in anticipation of the possibility that they might lose a conference. And if Mandela is still seen in these glorious ways, it would undermine their project. Nelson Mandela in good books, in the imagination of the voter, and in the ANC controlled by Jacob Zuma, where Ramaphosa has been expelled, is a dangerous proposition, and therefore send Julius to start attacking him. So this new, and it got pervasive, this idea that Nelson Mandela is a sellout amongst young people who 2 years before were crying when Nelson Mandela died, were saying Nelson Mandela is a great hero. All of a sudden, we're now a part of our own critique. Our critique is ideological, right? The Pan-Africanist Congress, the Black Consciousness Movement, and including these Trotskyites. But now you have people who 2 years ago were valorizing Mandela, go to London, and they are told that, well, let us now go against the image of Nelson Mandela. And I think that is one of the biggest motivation for me to try to explain actually what Nelson Mandela's own project is without rescuing him from our old critique, which is principled, which is ideologically sound in many ways, right? And then let me just quickly go through the other thing which I find very troubling. This idea that Mandela, I call it the fallacy of multiple Mandelas. There's a fallacy of multiple Mandelas. It is my contention that many people who can't cope with the figure of Nelson Mandela, more so those people who have their own perception of what he is, and if that perception comes into conflict with reality, if it comes to conflict with reality, to solve this problem, the Nelson Mandela they have, the truth of this Nelson Mandela, if this becomes a problem, to solve this problem, these people simply construct the multiplicities of Nelson Mandelas. I don't know if you've seen, I have done this myself, you know, there's a young Mandela, there's a Mandela in prison, there's a Mandela in negotiations, there's a Mandela in government. No. If you consider very carefully, actually, these constructs, they have no explanatory value, they have no validity. They're just ideological construct of self-deception. Because there is a failure to understand what Nelson Mandela's vision actually was and how far he went into realizing it. I suggest we need to provide an alternative framework to assessment to show that Mandela never, in fact, abandoned any of the ideals that he was prepared to die for. So I am revising all this argument that there is some kind of young Mandela, he's radical, the older Mandela is, no, Mandela was always Mandela. Now, if you want to see how crazy this multiplication of Nelson Mandela are, you can Google a TEDx talk by Sisonke Msimang. She actually presents 4 Nelson Mandelas. I'm not going to go through those Nelson Mandelas, but they don't make sense, okay? So, I mean, it's like the radical Mandela, the guy with the gun, prepared to kill to be killed. The principled pragmatist, the second one, refused to leave prison 6 times. We also know that Mandela wanted to leave prison many times, in fact. And then there's the third, the teddy bear, then the compromiser, and then post-government, the social activist Mandela, who is wearing the HIV solidarity t-shirt. I mean, this is nonsense, I'm sorry. Nelson was very clear from early on, and I will repeat what this project is, about what this project is. And he, in my view, has never wavered from that project. He might not have actually attained it. In fact, there must be a time when he probably literally forgets about it, but he has never abandoned it, I'm arguing. And going back to that quotation I've used earlier on of Adam, where they say Mandela never wavered. Mandela never wavered from his position. Mandela wanted majority rule, democracy, to realize this social democratic rule as envisaged by the Freedom Charter. That is his, Mandela wants majority rule to implement his vision of social democracy of the Freedom Charter. Now, those of us who criticize the Freedom Charter and so on, already, of course, we're no longer part of that conversation. But Mandela, Kwa Mandela, has his own project and he's carrying it out. And he understands that I need state power. I need state power to get to that project. The banning of the ANC and the PAC made the realization of this majority impossible without armed struggle, and then Mandela goes into armed struggle. You know, we don't have time, but something very interesting is this, that at a time of 61, 62, the banning of the ANC and the PAC, when you go outside of South Africa, the PAC was ahead of the ANC in terms of diplomatic acceptance. This is actually quite a shocking thing for me, actually, because I mean, I did not realize how big the PAC was outside of the country. And this was for two main reasons. Firstly, because of the Sharpeville massacre. Secondly, because of the PAC's pro-black position. You know, Sobukwe was bigger than Nelson Mandela outside of the country. I mean, this is actually interesting because this is Mandela's own admission. The ANC and Nelson Mandela were seen by Africans with great suspicion. According to Mandela himself, you know, the PAC had caused a lot of trouble for them. People don't know this, but I also didn't know this, that for a little while, there was a united front between the PAC and the ANC in exile around 62. This was forced upon these two organizations by of course, African states. Well, the PAC, after that collapsed front, presented the ANC as a closer tribal group controlled by whites, Indian, and communists. Things were so bad that the ANC delegation was temporarily denied accreditation in one of the conferences in Addis Ababa. In Long Walk to Freedom, Nelson Mandela, in fact, recalled this difficulty, and I quote him. He says, in the rest of Africa, most African leaders could understand the views of the PAC better than those of the ANC. O.R. Tambo had resolved that the ANC had to appear more independent, taking certain actions more unilaterally without the involvement of other members of the alliance. So there you are. Mandela himself, writing in his book, says, you know, when I went outside of the country, I found that the PAC was more accepted. We had difficulties and were presented as a party which was controlled by whites, and the PAC, of course, moved hard on that. Mandela went to the extent where he had to tell people like Yusuf Dadu, that, you know, let the ANC do its own thing. He says, Mandela, I was not talking about policy, I was talking about image. The image of the ANC was simply that it was controlled by white people. And then Mandela says to Dadu, we will still work together, my friend. Only that we, as the ANC, have to appear to be first amongst equals. Again, there I'm arguing the pragmatic, close quote, pragmatic Mandela is at work here, solving a practical problem in practical terms. If the African states say the ANC is controlled by Indians and whites, Nelson Mandela is going to present a picture of the ANC which is controlled by Africans, whilst talking to his Indian and white friends about this problem. So that is what sometimes people say that is opportunism, right? He's not standing on a principle which the African says you must stand on. He's saying, how do I solve this problem? Now, at this time, again, there's a big fight in the country for the heart and minds of the people. 1963, the ANC issues a pamphlet which says, spearheading the revolution. You must see that pamphlet. I don't have time to go through, but I can tell you that pamphlet, it is claimed that it was written by Ruth First. But this pamphlet, instead of talking about the ANC, it attacks the PAC, it attacks Pogo, but it also just shows you how big the PAC was vis-a-vis the ANC. But what I want to talk about is how Nelson Mandela associates himself with a radical posture at this time as part of this pragmatic argument. In fact, part of that pamphlet reads like, for instance, we need to smash the instruments of white power. And then they ask, what are these instruments of white power? The pamphlet says they are the army, the mines, the railway, the docks, the factories, the farms, the police, and the whole administration. And then the pamphlet asks, how will you smash them? It says, we've planned strategic violence. Whites are already scared. The whites are on the lookout. We must outwit them. We must hit them when they are not looking. We must hit them hardest when they are soft. That is a pamphlet that Nelson Mandela is associating himself with. But the thing about it is also how they insult the PAC throughout in that pamphlet. They talk about Potlagolobalo is useless, Potlagolobalo talk too much, the PAC doesn't know anything about me. Then we see Nelson's attitude to violence against in that article and that piece of paper or document that they found in Rivonia called Operation Maibuya. I'm not going to that, but it's a whole plan they're going to attack and so on and so forth. Now, why I'm going there is again to show you there that Nelson Mandela believes we want majority rule. We're going to do everything to get there. And we'll take up arms when necessary. Right? But the rationale is state power. I do not have the time, but I have here a note about the need to understand the conundrum of compromise versus selling out. There is this debilitating conflation conceptually between the notion of compromise and the notion of selling out. I was trying to present a framework of how we evaluate compromise and sell out, because there's this conflation of the two. We need to disaggregate selling out and compromises. This incapacity to make the distinction bedevils the liberation movement across time. And that is why I had spoke. Lenin himself is unhappy about this people's incapacity to deal with compromises. But let's go to Joe Slovo, who I argue give content to Nelson Mandela's compromise tactic. Well, Joe Slovo makes 2 or 3 important moves. Firstly, ask the question, at a time of negotiations, why are we negotiating? And he answers this question himself by saying, we're negotiating because towards the end of the 1980s, we concluded that as a result of its escalating crisis, the apartheid bloc was no longer able to continue ruling in the old way and was genuinely seeking some break with the past. At the same time, we were clearly not dealing with a defeated enemy, and any revolutionary seizure of power by the liberation movement could not be realistically posed. So he says, why are we negotiating? He says, well, there's a situation. The enemy is not defeated, it's very strong, but it needs some kind of a breather. We ourselves can march to the union buildings and take over. So there's a bit of a stalemate there. That is how he presents this situation. And then he further poses the question, Slovo, what then is the more precise place of negotiations in the liberation contest? He responds himself by saying, it is clearly a key element, negotiations. He asked the question, what is the role of negotiations in liberation? He answers, it is clearly a key element or a stage in the struggle process towards full and genuine liberation. It is a key element because it holds out the possibility of bringing about radical transformation political framework in which the struggle for the achievement of the main objective of national democratic revolution will be contested in conditions more favorable to the liberation process than they are now. I want to underline, a close quote, underline, well, if you negotiate, you will compromise, but you do this with the objective of improving your situation in the battlefield. In other words, if we negotiate, we should pose the negotiations, be able to contest till the enemy is not done after you negotiate, but you contest on conditions which are far more favorable to the liberation forces than it is right now. Okay, so you negotiate only to advance your position. Why I'm raising this issue is because a lot of us in the left, myself included, often we present a position that says there will be no compromises. But that is because we're conflating compromise with surrender. We're conflating compromise in the battlefield with abandonment of the objectives of the struggle. In the real struggle, you're going to have to find a zigzag, as they say sometimes. So long as you maintain your strategic objective about where you're going, where the objective conditions that where there's objective conditions that the struggle dynamic could be introduced to push for seizure of power by way of revolution. In other words, I'm asking here, were there possibilities, having heard what Slovo says, I'm asking, okay, but was the negotiation the only way? Could there be no other dynamic introduced to still pursue the position of seizure of power? My assessment is, at the time, there seemed to be no such evidence that you could simply march and mobilize towards taking state power. But I do want to say momentarily, for a short period of time, around the assassination of Hani, there was heightened mobilization and a sense of preparedness for war. I'm arguing that when they assassinated Hani, whilst the balance of forces prior to this moment were such that you could not march to Pretoria and take over, I'm arguing that at the time of Hani's death, at the time of his assassination, it mobilized and electrified the oppressed so much that a new dynamic was introduced. If a revolutionary call was made, a march to Pretoria might have just been possible. But now I'm saying under those conditions, favorable conditions for seizure of power, Mandela here can be accused of being a prisoner of his tactic of we want majority rule to democratic electoral process. He's committed to that. Mandela is committed to that. Attaining state power through democratic majority means is his tactical move. Instead of calling for the march on the union buildings, he presses in the negotiations for a date for elections. Chris Hani's assassination is what breaks the logjam in the negotiation and presents a date. The enemy could not withhold this much longer. The death of Chris Hani forces the National Party to abandon its tactic of dragging the negotiations process as long as it could. You know, there is evidence that the National Party's own strategic thinking was that they will drag the negotiations for another 5 years. And as they negotiate, they will increase the violence in the Black community to create the conditions where our people will get disillusioned from the ANC. In other words, our people will start saying, well, the ANC is not defending us, we are dying here, and they will abandon the ANC in terms of electoral support. When the elections would have come after 5 years, after massive violence generated by the apartheid regime, they believe that in this way they'll be able to hold the ANC majoritarian move. Now, that is not idle talk. If we know what historically has happened, for instance, in Nicaragua, you know, they bombed the people to a point where they called an election, people voted for peace. People voted for peace, voting for an opposition instead of voting for the party that they love. I'm arguing that Mandela focused on the results, considered, and I mean, we're coming to the closure of my intervention. Mandela focused on the results. Okay, he acceded to almost all the demands of the opposition, including the extreme right wing. You know, we know now that the extreme right wing managed to get into the Constitution clause 235, which is basically about self-determination. Orania is catered for in the Constitution. A lot of people don't know this because we really don't go there. But there's been a new, publication, Black Consciousness 101, Volume 101, where a very nice piece is there, where we are taken through this self-determination clause and the processes that were followed. So Nelson Mandela says, fine, if you guys want a Burestat, we put it in the Constitution, you can have your Burestat. And then he gives the IFP whatever they want, he just wants an election. Joe Slovo goes further, he surrenders the civil service for 5 years in the what you call the sunset clauses. Not only that, the ANC even writes into the Constitution, Section 25, the protection of property. So Mandela gave all that for majority rule. The question is, what did Mandela gain when he makes this move? I'm arguing that he gained the state. Contested, yes. Contested, yes. Not completely owned by the ANC, but not longer owned by the National Party. The army, the secret service, and its capacity for assassination, the judiciary, a large chunk of the legislature now was in the hands of the ANC as a consequence of the compromise cut by Mandela. As we have, Slovo says, negotiations are necessary to create favorable conditions to advance the revolution. I'm arguing that Nelson's compromises actually make this objective, deliver this objective. The struggle, as Slovo says, has to be pursued under favorable conditions, which would have maturated in 5 years. That is, I mean, after the sunset process come to an end. Now, enter Mbeki. Yeah, there is my main point, right? So Nelson sells out, compromises. His compromises give the ANC the state. Thabo Mbeki enters this situation where the sunset clauses don't have to apply. Not only that, Thabo Mbeki takes over an administration which is by and large in the hands of the ANC. He's standing on the weight of 2/3 majority electoral support. Mbeki is not constrained by the limitation of social democratic vision of Nelson Mandela, which imagines liberation in terms of the Freedom Charter. I'm saying Mbeki comes here, he takes power. He doesn't have to even follow what Nelson Mandela's project is. He doesn't have to follow the Freedom Charter. He has the state. He has a big majority. He can go much deeper and further than Mandela. Mbeki basically has a blank check to author the deepening of the liberation process. This blank check was made possible by the compromises cut by Mandela. I'm not trying to rescue Mandela. I'm saying, if you understand Mandela in his terms, even beyond his own intention, even go beyond his own intentions, his compromise provides for a much larger possibility to pursue the liberation project, even in terms of the ANC. So in a sense, therefore, the biggest sellout here of the ANC, if you like, you can include Mandela, is that these guys did have the state. Not only that, Thabo Mbeki doesn't just have the state, but he also has a 2/3 majority that can be mobilized to actually push all the compromises that Nelson Mandela has made out of the way and pursue the agenda of liberation. So from this perspective, we can see that it was not Mandela who sold out his vision, but on the contrary, it was the ANC and Mbeki who sold Mandela's vision. In fact, they could have, and now I'm arguing, they could have even abandoned the Mandela vision and articulated a much more radical vision because they now have the state. By the way, I'm also further arguing if you like, in a schematic fashion in terms of relations of power, that I don't see the ANC or say for instance, it was the Winnie and Hani move that persisted. I don't see them being in any better position than where Thabo Mbeki is in terms of state power. They would not have been any better than where Mbeki is in terms. So Nelson, with his route of compromise and so on, has arrived at exactly where Winnie, I'm arguing, Winnie and Hani would have been as far as the state power is concerned. So Mbeki, instead of pushing this radical agenda, this possibility is open, he goes right wing, declares himself a Thatcherite, imposes a brutal market economic framework that entrenches white power and white capital and squeezes the poor to the margins. He abandons even the limited, RDP and his social democratic promises and imposes GEAR. All we know, GEAR is a very vicious pro-white monopoly capital program. He externalizes GEAR into NEPAD. He allows capital to move. The biggest expropriation of assets happened under Mbeki when he allows the Big Five to list in the in the London Stock Exchange. So there's money movement, there's entrenchment of capital under Mbeki, when in fact he could have moved a different direction. In short, Mbeki voluntarily snatches defeat at the gates of victory. In this now entrenched narrative of Mandela as a sellout, it places Mbeki, Mbeki's place is absent. Mbeki's place is absent. And it robs us of a full picture to be able to draw lessons and to avoid this debilitating, unnecessary defeat. Now I'm arguing that, and this is my last few minutes. In the next 2 minutes, I'll be done. And then I'll take your questions. I'm arguing that even if accounting for an unfavorable international balance of forces, I'm talking about Mbeki, with the triumph of the United States of America's horror ideological construct over the Soviet nightmare, I would still maintain that the conditions under which Mbeki took state power were favorable for the advancement of the revolutionary project as essentially a domestic project of reconstruction and development. I'm arguing that Mbeki instead chose surrender unprovoked. As I indicated at the beginning, it's only when we see fully the opportunities opened by the Mandela compromises, these opportunities from Mbeki era, that we're able to understand better the potential for deepening change that process represented. And I'm arguing that a case can be made that Mandela did, of course, fall in love with the compromises, elevated them into virtue. That Mandela forgot why he compromised and why these compromises were needed. He got tired and he just parked. But I'm saying these excuses are not available to Thabo Mbeki. So the lessons here are very clear. In war, there arise conditions that necessitate compromise in order to continue to fight under better conditions. You know, in September 1917, Lenin was prepared to make concession. Lenin is the biggest revolutionary. Nobody can say Lenin is a sellout. No, Lenin is the biggest revolutionary of the 20th century. But in September, the revolution, remember, happened in October. In September, Lenin was prepared to make concessions, make compromises. Little did he know that in October there will be revolution. And I quote him in September. What is he saying in September, Lenin? He says, the Russian Revolution is experiencing so abrupt and original a turn that we, as a party, may offer a voluntary compromise. True, not to our direct main class enemy, the bourgeoisie, but to the nearest adversary, the ruling petty bourgeois democratic parties, the social revolutionaries, and the Mensheviks. He goes on to say, we may offer a compromise to these parties only by way of exception and only by virtue of the particular situation, which will obviously last only a very short time. And I think we should do so. We should compromise. We should compromise. And then it goes on to say, the compromise on our part is our return to the pre-July demand of all power to the Soviets and the government of the social revolutionaries and the Mensheviks responsible to the Soviets. So they close quotes. I'm saying to you, a month before the revolution happens in Russia, the biggest revolutionary of last century says, I'm prepared to compromise to put ourselves in a position that it will give us a better chance to pursue our struggle. So the question in conclusion arises, is Mandela a sellout? Yes, if we maintain our rejection of the political vision of the ANC, more so the 1955 Freedom Charter. Did Nelson Mandela sell out his vision? The answer here is more undecided. And I am prepared to say this. Well, he didn't. On the contrary, his vision was sold out by Thabo Mbeki. In moving forward, we have to now study how the wide world, I didn't go deep into how the wide world, which Mandela's compromises served so well, is turning against him and seeks to reduce him to just another black man, because maintaining his stature so high as they have makes him potentially a dangerous proposition for their interest. I'm going to stop there and take the questions. Okay, there's a question here. The hypothesis that demonization of Mandela was based on Nasrec RT threat. Marxist is fascinated, but seem to underplay the Mandela was already appropriated globally and largely by liberal forces, including the liberal DA, effectively making Mandela a global moral figure, a man of peace. The idealism of no, but I mean, I hear what you're saying there, comrades. But Mandela is not just that. And I understand that capital is not fighting Mandela because they hate him, but capital understand that Mandela's stature, and as an ANC man, under condition where the ANC is controlled by a force hostile to capital, global capital, such as the RET forces, is dangerous to their interest. So they needed the ANC to come under 51% in the second scenario where they did not win the conference in Nazareth, right? So So in that case, Mandela presents a problem because he'll give the ANC an advantage. But if you attack the Mandela stature, you would minimize that possibility and give yourself an advantage of getting that 51%. That's all. I mean, they're not abandoning the Mandela guy, but Mandela is loved by black people. Don't make mistake. People will vote for the ANC for Mandela. I mean, all our parents will vote for the ANC for Mandela. And global capital understand that. And it understood that if they attack him sufficiently, there will be no increase for the ANC on the basis of Mandela the saint. That's all I'm saying. I'm not saying that Mandela, for instance, I'm not arguing, and I've not made this argument that Mandela's stature can be mobilized for revolutionary utility. Even if I hope it could be, but I mean, I think that, as you say, you know, he's highly contaminated by this appropriation, and he's done it himself. Is the Black conscience of the Pan-Africanist bloc ready for the removal of the ANC as a ruling regime? No. That is the honest answer. No. The Black consciousness movement, the original Black consciousness movement, is in such a bad state. The PAC is in also a very horrible state. BLF is one of the Black consciousness formations which is very young itself. The people may be ready for massive change, but we have not organized ourselves for that change to happen. I mean, if we were to look just in the last elections, I mean, you know, Azapo got about, I don't know, 6,000 votes, something like that. Even if they stole their votes, I mean, the PAC in 1994 started with 5 MPs. It is struggling to maintain 1 MP from the point of view of popular masses. I mean, we can argue about how they steal our votes. That is true. That is also true. But they steal because we are so disorganized. We are unable to even guard our own votes. So there's a lot of work that must happen before we can claim. In fact, my fear is that if a revolution can break out now, reactionaries will take over that revolution by virtue of them being better organized than we are. So that calls for, you know, my own argument is this. A well-organized Black First, Land First is the best proposition for both the Pan-Africanist Congress and the Black consciousness movements in South Africa, because probably we would be better positioned to unite all these forces than they could unite themselves. So we must build Black First, Land First if we want to see the united, strengthened Black consciousness organization. In fact, probably we'll end up with the RET forces if the ANC somehow orientating towards us and us towards them, and in this way organizing some kind of possibility for change.
Good evening, comrade.
Good, and you?
Kunjani? Sure. No, I just want to find out 2 questions. Compromise and possibility of joining, or rather jumping into the ruling party. In terms of compromise, I mean, a couple of times you've said there's actually, as long as you keep to the objective, compromise is actually not a bad thing. Now, for the longest time, you've been preaching that, for example, Bo Julius would take funding from here and say they're going to make a revolution, but they buy this and that nice things. So when as a figure of leadership, how far are you willing maybe to compromise for the growth of the party, which is BLF, in terms of finding resources that are much needed to grow it? 2, the last time we were talking about, I remember on some show I was saying that if maybe you were to join the ruling party, they would expel you the next day, of which, as things stand, that is very much possible. But how far are you willing to compromise yourself and be disciplined enough in the ruling party, maybe, to push a program that might gain the radical left more ground, also in support of the RET grouping within the ruling party. So how far would you compromise yourself and be disciplined enough to see that maybe you are not expelled long enough so that you can gain more ground inside there?
Yeah.
Thank you very
Thank you, my
much.
leader. No, thank you, leadership. But your question is that how far I'm prepared to compromise. I'm not prepared to compromise at all. Compromise a vision of change. Black consciousness, black fasts, land fed, that vision cannot be compromised. But you have to say tactically, what moves do we need to make? And what do we need to give to gain what? I am not, let me just say this. Personally, I am not in love with organizations. No, I'm in love with liberation. If you said to me tomorrow, Chief, leave that thing we are doing with BLF, because together with BLF and this other thing, we can make massive changes, I will follow that. I'm not interested in building BLF for BLF's sake. We are building BLF because we believe we have to build an organization that is able to fight for Black people. But if there are other possibilities, we will certainly follow those possibilities. I will persuade my comrades and say, comrades, this thing that is being suggested now is the best for a revolutionary project. But here's my leader, the ANC. Me going to the ANC, how will that assist anyone? I don't see how would me joining the ANC assist anyone. I mean, you will have to persuade me that, well, RET will be pushed better. But I see comrades in the ANC who are RET forces can't even raise criticisms. They can't raise criticisms. They're scared because they will be kicked out. So I think the best thing is to work with the ANC RET forces outside of the ANC. We could, I think, as BLF, we should seriously consider asking for alliance membership of the ANC so that we maintain our organization, we fight our battles outside, we bury people who are opening up graves, including the ANC, if they were to accept us in there, without losing our capacity to fight. Because if you go into the ANC, my brother, you are in. If you misbehave, you are out. We can't afford that. We must build a revolutionary force, which must work with the revolutionaries inside the ANC. Work with the revolutionaries in the PAC, in AZAPO. I mean, those AZAPO, PAC, APC, and BLF should be one thing. All right. So I'm saying this with all the humility that I have. But the real thing is the ANC, is the ANC now, how we dovetail with it. I just want to say that, please remember that we have the book, Blacks Can Be Racist. You can order it on this Black Can Be Racist page. Just send a request. The notes of the talk I gave are available. They will be edited and it will be sent to you. It's over 5,000 words. And I want to thank all of you who have participated in this project. And I mean, I'm going to take all your submissions. I mean, I can see some of them are on my wall. They're also on that wall. When I finalize the lecture, or the notes of the lecture, I will take those into consideration. It has been for me a little bit process of just a serious reflection about the place of Nelson Mandela. And let me reiterate, I hold the critique of Mandela that was presented by Black Consciousness as correct. But I do want to explain, but when I explain, I remove myself, that in terms of his own project, Nelson Mandela, one couldn't easily simply say he sold out. In fact, what you would see is that his vision was sold out. Even when I think he did not think that far, even when he had forgotten why he compromised, those compromises did present serious possibilities to advance the revolutionary process, and Thabo Mbeki didn't. That's basically my argument. And Nyabonga cool. Please do buy the book. Blacks Can Be Racist. Just send in your request, and it will be sent to you. If you, there are a number of options that you'll be assisted with. And Nyabonga Kulu, we will be in touch. Engos.